This is Photography and Walking. I'm Philippe. So I want to begin where night begins. Not only in the eyes, but in the body. When you walk after dark, something shifts almost immediately. Steps become more measured. Sounds travel farther, and footsteps register differently on stone. The city presses closer, even when the street is empty. The moment you step into the street at night, perception narrows and sharpens at the same time. Distances collapse. Details surface. It's as if the city stops presenting itself as a panorama and becomes a sequence of fragments. Black and white photographs belong to this condition, not as nostalgia or style, but as constraint. At night, color tends to explain too much. It smooths things over. Black and white resists that. It leaves the dark unresolved. Shadows remain shadows, and light doesn't redeem. It just leans in close. Photography enters here, yes. It captures, but it also pauses. It's a way of standing still long enough for the street to register. In black and white, night walking is no longer about seeing more. It's about noticing what usually slips past. Now, when we think about night photography in the history of documentary work, Brassaï is one of the first names that comes to mind, if not the first. His images of Paris after dark have shaped how night itself is photographed. Cafes, streets, figures moving through pools of light. Those photographs form a kind of shared visual memory. But the photo I want to spend time with today is not one of those familiar scenes. It doesn't show walkers moving through the night. It shows what remains after they've passed. What Brassaï photographs here are traces. Marks left on stone, on walls, on architecture. Gestures made by anonymous hands long before he stopped and set up his camera. This shift matters. It opens another way of seeing the city, not as a stage populated by figures, but as a palimpsest, a surface written, erased, and written again. So for this episode, I've chosen a photograph from Brassaï's Graffiti series, dated from 1944-45. The print I'm discussing is held in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art, and one of the things that immediately matters to me is that we don't actually know whether it was taken by day or by night. There's no caption to settle this, no definite lighting cue. And I think this uncertainty only adds to the richness of the work. In my own imaginary, I always see this photograph as having been made at night. I imagine Brassaï standing there with his camera, working through a long exposure. Night photography, for him, was never easy. The equipment he used demanded time, sometimes many minutes, and the city didn't always cooperate. Street lamps were both necessary and unforgiving. To pull detail out of the shadows, he had to let the light accumulate, knowing that anything too close to the lamp could burn out completely. Highlights could wash out, and darkness could swallow everything else. Every night photograph was a negotiation. When I look at this photograph, I imagine a single street lamp positioned just to the right of the wall. The light grazes the surface, not flooding it, but skimming across it, catching recesses and ridges. And that's important because what we're looking at here isn't simply graffiti in the casual sense. It reads almost as a bas-relief. The markings are carved into the stone. The face, because for me it is unmistakably a face, emerges through shadow and relief, not line. The light doesn't illuminate it evenly, it models it. Photography, as an autonomous art form, has always had a quiet, intimate relationship with sculpture. Not in terms of subject matter, but in how form is revealed through light. Sculpture exists through shadow as much as through volume. It is read by the way light moves across its surface, by what recedes and what protrudes. When a photograph begins to behave this way, when it starts to register depth, resistance, relief, it leans towards sculpture. Brassaï's picture does exactly that. The wall stops being a flat support and becomes a surface, with weight, memory, tactility. It's no longer just an image of a mark on a wall. It becomes an encounter with form. And the connection doesn't stop with photography. Walking itself, when it began to be recognized as an autonomous art form in the 1960s, emerged largely out of sculpture. Artists like Hamish Fulton and Richard Long understood walking as a way of shaping space through movement, of working with distance, duration, and the body rather than with objects. During that period, artists such as Gilbert and George would treat the body moving through the world as a kind of living sculpture. Seen this way, Brassaï standing still in front of a wall and the anonymous hands that carved it while passing through the city belonged to the same continuum. Bodies negotiating space and allowing form to emerge. Brassaï worked on his graffiti series for more than 2 decades, roughly from the early 1930s into the mid-1950s. What he was photographing were carvings, scratches, etchings, marks made slowly, repeatedly, sometimes anonymously, on the walls of Paris. Some of these markings are clearly representational. Faces, animals, hearts. Others hover closer to abstraction. Burr holes, scars, rhythms, accumulations. In those cases especially, framing becomes decisive. Through his compositional choices, fragments become figures, and accidents become presences. By the time the series was first shown publicly in New York, at MoMA in 1956-57, Brassaï had already begun organizing the photographs into recurring subject groups. MoMA's press material notes 5: faces, love, death, magic, and animals. In the book that followed, that way of organizing the pictures expands into a more elaborate set of sections. The photograph I'm focusing on, which I've linked to on the Photography and Walking website, dates from 1944-45, at the end of World War II. That context really matters. The image I see here, a head crowned, can't help but resonate with that moment: power, sovereignty, and survival. And I can't look at that crown without thinking, anachronistically but insistently, of Jean-Michel Basquiat's crowned heads. Different city, different era, and the same insistence on placing symbols where they can't be ignored. Brassaï understood that walls have lives. They accumulate gestures. They carry traces. They remember. His graffiti photographs open onto a parallel, underground cycle of Paris, one that's less concerned with monuments than with fear, desire, humor, violence, and belief. I've also linked on the Photography and Walking website to a text from the Victoria and Albert Museum. So, whether this photo was taken by day or by night finally doesn't matter. What matters is that it behaves like a night photograph. It asks us to slow down and let forms emerge gradually, to accept uncertainty. Like walking in the city after dark, it sharpens attention without fully resolving what we see. Now that way of seeing didn't appear fully formed. Brassaï was born Gyula Halash in Transylvania in a city called Brașov, then part of Hungary, today in Romania. When he later adopted the name Brassaï, he wasn't inventing an identity so much as carrying one forward. The name is a trace of origin, folded into the life he would build elsewhere. In 1924, he moved to Paris and stayed. The city offered a density he recognized immediately, a place made not only of monuments, but of streets that carried memory. It was in Paris that Halash became Brassaï, and it was by walking, especially at night, that he began to understand the city. He moved in close proximity to the surrealists sharing their interest in chance encounters and the city as a site of unconscious expression. But he was never fully absorbed, remaining near but never totally aligned with the group. That distance matters, as his photographs aren't illustrations of theory. They stay close to the ground, to pavement and stone. In 1933, Brassaï published Paris de Nuit. The book is often described as an exploration of the Parisian underworld, cafes, night streets, figures moving through pockets of light, and those figures are there. But what I think holds the book together is not spectacle, it's patience. Brassaï worked with a Voigtländer 6x9 camera, often mounted on a tripod. I like to imagine him standing still after walking, letting the body settle before the exposure begins. Night photography in the early 1930s required time, long exposures, waiting, standing still. This was not street photography as quick capture. It was street photography as duration. Henry Miller, the American writer who lived in Paris at the time, famously called him the Eye of Paris. It's a seductive phrase, but also a misleading one. Brassaï does not survey the city from above. He encounters it from within, at walking speed. Years later, Patrick Modiano would suggest another lineage altogether, writing that Brassaï made him think of Restif de la Bretonne and Gérard de Nerval, writers for whom Paris was not a spectacle to be mastered, but a ground to be walked, revisited, and slowly absorbed. His Paris is not panoramic. It's fragmentary. Corners, walls, doorways, inscriptions. What Paris de Nuit ultimately reveals is not simply a social underside, but a city that writes on itself. Names scratched into stone, signs hastily painted, marks made without permission and left behind. Walking at night, Brassaï reads these surfaces not as curiosities, but as evidence. Evidence that the city remembers. Walking at night teaches us to trust what doesn't fully reveal itself, to accept fragments, to read what remains. And Brassaï understood this, not by explaining the city, but by standing still long enough for it to register. Walls, marks, scratches, traces. A city that writes on itself even when no one is watching. Thank you for walking with me today. You can find photos and further notes for this episode on the Photography and Walking website. And you can follow the project on Instagram, on YouTube, or wherever you listen. Until next time, take your time.